Have you ever stopped to think that sometimes God has to close your eyes so you can finally learn how to see? Sounds crazy, right? I used to think so too. In fact, I was one of those guys who believed he had everything under control. Work on track, money coming in, plans moving full speed ahead, and God? Well, God was just a detail. Actually, not even that. In my mind, I didn't need him for anything. After all, who needs God when you think you've got it all figured out on your own, right? But that's when life showed me otherwise. And when I say, showed me, I mean it took away one of the things I valued most, my sight. Out of nowhere, or almost out of nowhere, my world began to go dark. And the worst part? I realized I had actually been blind for a long time. Not blind in my eyes, but blind in my soul, my spirit, blind to what really matters. And it was in that darkness that God decided to turn on the brightest light I've ever experienced. Oh, and for those who don't know me, let me introduce myself. My name is Samuel Roberts. I'm 41 years old. I live in San Diego, California, and I'm an entrepreneur. Or at least I was, until blindness took me out of the game, stripped me of control, knocked me to the ground, shattered my pride, and, surprisingly, taught me how to really live. Yes, I lost my sight. But that's exactly how I learned to see God. And listen, if you think this is just another sad story, then get ready. Because what you're about to hear might just change your life. If you had looked at me a few years ago, you probably would have called me an ordinary guy. Back then, my life was nonstop. I'd wake up early, head to work, juggle 1,000 things at once, and when I finally had a little free time, well, I spent it chasing fleeting pleasures, traveling, dining out, parties, and those random shopping sprees we do just to feel alive, you know? The truth is, I lived like tomorrow was guaranteed, as if everything depended solely on me. And God? Well, God wasn't even part of the equation. To be honest, I didn't stop to think about any of that. My mind was constantly filled with deadlines, goals, clients, money, achievements. I had that typical mindset. If I don't do it for myself, no one will. And that's how I lived, stacking up material wins while completely ignoring what today I know was the most valuable thing of all, the presence of God. I thought I was in control, and man, how wrong I was. We hold on so tightly to this illusion of control, we don't even notice when life starts flashing warning signs. What's wild is that, looking back, everything seemed perfect until it wasn't. Funny how life has a way of putting us right where we need to be, doesn't it? I was so busy chasing the things of this world, I didn't even see it coming. Something was slowly being taken away from me, something I never thought I'd lose. And that's when the story takes a turn I never expected to live through. You know the kind of person who thinks they can handle everything on their own? Yeah, that was me. I used to believe, almost arrogantly, that I didn't need God for anything. In my mind, people who leaned on faith, prayer, or the Bible were weak, people who didn't know how to face life head-on. I trusted only in my intellect, my skills, my ability to fix any problem that came my way. After all, everything I had achieved up to that point, I thought I had done it all with my own two hands, or at least, that's what I believed. I clearly remember the times my sister, Victoria, tried to talk to me about God. I mocked her. Sometimes I even laughed out loud. I'd say things like, "Victoria, come on, life belongs to the strong, the ones who hustle, the ones who make things happen. Waiting on God, that's a waste of time. And what's crazy is, I said that with total confidence, like it was the ultimate truth. I was so blind, and had no idea that blindness would one day become my reality, in a way I never could have imagined. And now, looking back, I can see how this so-called self-sufficiency was actually an invisible prison. We think we're unstoppable, until life shows us we're nothing without God. But back then? Oh, back then I was at the peak of my spiritual arrogance, thinking that control, money, and success were all I needed. Little did I know that one small detail I had always overlooked was about to bring everything I believed crashing down. It all started so subtly that, if I knew then what I know now, I would have paid a lot more attention. But at the time, I just brushed it off. First came some strange headaches, quick spells of dizziness, and every now and then, blurry vision, like someone had wiped my eyes with a dirty cloth. You know that feeling when you wake up and everything looks a bit out of focus? It was kind of like that. But of course, I did what anyone who thinks they're invincible would do. I ignored it. Oh, it's probably just stress, exhaustion, too much time in front of the computer, I told myself. And to be honest, the warning signs were there. There were days I'd be driving and realize I couldn't read the road signs clearly, or that I had to squint just to read a simple message on my phone. But in my pride, I kept brushing it all aside. After all, who has time for doctors when you're too busy winning at life, right? Look, today I can tell you without a doubt, ignoring the signs is one of the dumbest mistakes we can make. Life always gives us signs. Always. But not everyone is willing to listen. And it's funny, or maybe tragic, how sometimes God even allows small warnings to pull us away from a path of destruction. But I was so obsessed with my own race that I just closed my eyes to it all, literally. And little did I know that what I thought was just a minor inconvenience was actually the beginning of something that would turn my whole world upside down. And if you think things were already complicated up to this point, just wait until you hear what happened next. I remember that appointment like it was yesterday. You know when you walk into a doctor's office thinking it's going to be something minor? That was me. I was sure the doctor would take a quick look, prescribe some eye drops, tell me to rest a few days, and that'd be it. But that's not what happened. Dr. Stephen Harris, a well-known specialist, welcomed me with this serious, almost concerned look. He ran a bunch of tests, had me stare into lights, read those tiny letters on the wall, and with each test I failed, his face just grew heavier. That's when it started to hit me. This wasn't something simple. When he pulled his chair closer and said, "Samuel, we need to have a serious talk," my heart started racing. And then, without sugarcoating it, he hit me with a sentence I never imagined hearing in my life. "You have a degenerative eye disease. It's progressive and unfortunately irreversible." I was speechless. You know that feeling when the floor drops out from under you, when everything starts spinning and you can't breathe? That was exactly it. I tried to process it, tried to search for some kind of way out, like, "But doctor, there's treatment, right?" Just to hear him say no. Not the kind I was hoping for. And man, it's wild how, in just a few minutes, your life can start to feel like a horror movie. I walked into that office thinking I had everything under control. I walked out realizing that, truth is, I never had control over anything. And even with all that, even after hearing those words, the worst part hadn't even begun. Because if you think getting a diagnosis like that is hard, just wait until you have to face everything that comes after. In the days that followed, it felt like I'd been thrown into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. And you know what's worse? I refused to accept it. My mind couldn't, or didn't want to, process it. I kept repeating to myself, "No, this isn't happening. This can't be real." And the more I denied it, the more the anger grew inside me. Anger at everything, the world, the doctors, myself, and especially at a God I hadn't even believed in before, but who, in that moment, became the one I started blaming. It went on for days, actually weeks, where I completely shut down. I pushed everyone away, turned down visits, ignored messages, turned off my phone. Not even Victoria, my sister, my rock, my safe place, could get close. And listen, if you've ever been through a moment when everything feels like it's falling apart, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It's that suffocating feeling where you don't know if you should cry, scream, break something, or just lie down and wait for the world to end. And to be completely honest, I chose to stay quiet, to shut everyone out, to disconnect from everything. And in the middle of that emotional storm, one question kept echoing in my mind. Why me? Why now? Why like this? But you know what's even more ironic? We think we've hit rock bottom at that point, but we don't realize that sometimes even rock bottom has a basement. And sadly, I was about to find out that the hole I was in was much deeper than I ever imagined. With each passing day, it was like the world was fading, becoming duller, grayer, more blurry, until, suddenly, I couldn't tell the difference between shadow and light anymore. My vision slowly slipped away, like someone was quietly turning down the brightness on a dimmer switch. And as my physical sight faded, it felt like my soul was going dark too. I'd wake up, put my hands over my face, blink hard, hoping that, somehow, by a miracle, everything would go back to normal. But it didn't. And that realization, God, it tore me apart inside. And when I say my soul went dark, I mean it. I couldn't find meaning in anything anymore. Things that once made me smile, like a simple sunset, the faces of the people I loved, even the city lights at night, had become nothing but painful memories. And along with that came the most dangerous thoughts a person can have. Thoughts of giving up, of ending it all, of just disappearing. I felt useless, broken, disposable, like my existence had no value anymore. And listen, if you're hearing this and think I'm exaggerating, it's only because, thank God, you've never had to walk through a darkness like that. It's the kind of pain that's almost impossible to describe. Only those who've lived it truly understand. And even then, as crazy as it sounds, that still wasn't the end. Because just when you think you've lost everything, life has a way of showing you there's still more you can lose. The day the darkness took over completely was, without a doubt, the worst day of my life. I woke up, like any other day, and sensed that something was different. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, shook my head, nothing. Absolutely nothing. Just a thick, heavy, suffocating darkness. And let me tell you, it's hard to put into words what it feels like to wake up and realize that from that moment on, you're never going to see anything again. The first thing that hit me was panic. Then, an emptiness so deep, it felt like I was dying while still alive. You know, we never think something like that could happen to us. Never. We always believe those stories happen to other people, that it's far from our reality. But in that moment, I understood that everything I thought defined me, my work, my success, my independence, suddenly meant nothing. It was like life had flipped a switch and shut everything down. And you know what's even more cruel? It's not just losing your sight. It's losing your sense of self, your identity. I no longer knew who I was. And to make it worse, with that darkness came a devastating certainty. It's over, Samuel. It's over. I couldn't imagine a future. I couldn't see a way out. I couldn't believe that anything good could come from that. All I could see was nothing. And it's crazy to think that sometimes it's on the very day we lose everything that, without realizing it, we start walking toward what truly matters. But of course, back then, I had no idea. If there's one thing no one tells you, it's that rock bottom has a name. And that name is loneliness. And I'm not talking about the kind of loneliness where you're just physically alone. No, it's the kind that lives inside you. The kind that eats you from the inside out, that makes you feel invisible, useless, forgotten. I shut myself away inside my house, and worse, inside my own mind. I refused help, blocked my friends, and even pushed away my sister, Victoria, the one person who had never let go of my hand. I didn't want anyone around. And if I can be brutally honest here, I couldn't even stand myself anymore. That voice in my head wouldn't stop. It's over. No one understands you. No one knows what it's like to live in the dark. And you know what? Not even God cares about you. That's how it was, every day, every hour. And me, the guy everyone saw as strong, independent, the one who always had it all together, I was broken down and completely lost. I spent entire days lying on the couch, doing nothing, saying nothing, just listening to the sound of silence, which somehow screamed louder than any word. And in the middle of that silence, I realized that loneliness is one of the enemy's cruelest weapons to destroy a person. And you know, it's strange to admit this now, but it's true. When you shut yourself off from the world, you also shut yourself off from God. And that's exactly what I did. I closed every door, closed my heart, shut everything down. I thought no one could help me, not even him. But oh, my friend, life has a funny way of turning things upside down when you least expect it. And it was right when I thought the darkness was finally going to swallow me whole that something completely unexpected started to happen. You know those endless nights? The kind where the silence feels like it's screaming, and the darkness gets so heavy it feels like it's crushing your soul? Yeah, I had a lot of those. And honestly, I lost count of how many times I sat on the bedroom floor, alone, hugging my knees, just trying to figure out where I went wrong. My thoughts kept spinning in circles. Why, God? Why me? Why like this? And even as I asked those questions, deep down, I didn't really believe he was listening. To be honest, I didn't even know if he truly existed. It's surreal how, when the darkness inside you grows bigger than any light, the darkest thoughts start knocking at your door. And I'm not gonna lie here. The thought of ending it all did cross my mind. There were moments when it felt like the only way out. I stared into nothing, or better yet, felt the nothing and thought, what's the point of going on like this? Why keep living this way? And look, if you've never faced pain that deep, you might think I'm exaggerating. But if you've been there, you know your mind can become a dangerous battlefield. And the craziest part is that, even in that pit, there was still this small part of me that somehow cried out for help. But I was so hurt, so broken, I had no idea where that help could come from. All I knew was, if something didn't change soon, I wasn't going to last much longer. And it was right at that moment, when I had stopped expecting anything at all, that a simple phone call from one simple person completely changed the course of my story. The phone rang. And honestly, the last thing I wanted at that moment was to talk to anyone. But for some reason, I still can't explain. I picked up. It was her, my sister Victoria. And unlike all the other times, she didn't come with a bunch of motivational words or try to convince me of anything. She just said one single sentence, short, direct, and my God, how that sentence pierced straight through my soul. You've lost your eyesight, but you can't lose the vision of your soul. God is still here. In that moment, silence. I couldn't answer. I just stood there, holding the phone, while that sentence echoed in my mind. For the first time in a long time, I felt something shift. I couldn't tell you if it was hope, if it was pain, if it was longing for God, or maybe all of that at once. All I know is, it broke me. And it wasn't just the words themselves, but the weight they carried. It was like, for the first time in what felt like forever, someone had lit a candle in the middle of the darkness my life had become. And the strange thing is, even after I hung up, that sentence didn't leave me. On the contrary, it stayed, echoing inside me, poking at the walls of my pride, my pain, my emptiness. And you know what? That tiny spark, that blessed spark, ignited something in me that I didn't even know was still there. The need to talk to God. But talk to God? After all these years away? After everything I said, everything I thought? How do you even do that? I had no idea. But still, I tried. I had no idea how to pray. Seriously, in my mind, prayer was something for religious people, for folks who went to church, who knew all those beautiful words filled with verses and formalities. And me? I was just a broken man, lost, blind, directionless, and, up until that point, without God. But that night, through tears, silence, and a lump in my throat, I simply got on my knees. I didn't know how, didn't know what to say. I just closed my eyes, or at least tried to, since open or closed made no difference, and whispered, shaky and awkward, God, if you're real, help me. And look, there was no background music, no angel coming down from heaven, no light shining in the room. It was just me, my pain, and a heavy silence. But you know that kind of silence that doesn't feel empty? That somehow feels full of something? That's exactly what it was. For the first time in a long time, I felt a presence. I can't explain it. I can't put it into words. But somehow, I knew God was listening. I don't know if He was answering me, but listening? I'm sure He was. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. No, my vision didn't come back. My situation didn't suddenly change. The pain, the fear, the emptiness, they were all still there. But along with them, something else appeared, something I hadn't felt in years. A tiny flicker, just a small trace of peace. Like in the middle of the storm, someone had dropped an anchor into my soul. And in that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of a story I had never imagined I'd live. In the days that followed, I started to notice something strange, but good. It was like, even without being able to see with my eyes, I had started to see in a different way. I can't fully explain it, but things I used to overlook suddenly began to make sense. You know that soft breeze coming through the window? That smell of freshly brewed coffee? The sound of birds early in the morning? Yeah, I had never paid attention to any of that. And suddenly, those little things started to feel incredibly valuable to me. It was as if God was teaching me to see from the inside out. And look, I had always been that skeptic, the tough guy, the one who didn't trust anything he couldn't touch or explain. But I started to notice signs. Yes, signs. Things I used to call coincidences, I now understood as God's care. People I hadn't spoken to in years started reaching out. A word, a song playing at just the right moment, a message that showed up out of nowhere. And even though I tried to brush it off, it was impossible not to notice. God was speaking to me. Maybe not in the way I expected, but definitely in the way I needed. And the craziest part is, even though I didn't fully understand it all, I started to want more, to search more, to feel more. That's when, for the first time, I said yes to my sister's invitation to listen to an online sermon. And man, I had no idea, but that one simple click on what seemed like just another random video would open a door I never even knew existed. A door to something so much bigger, so much deeper. Something I never imagined I'd get to experience. It happened on just another ordinary night, or at least it seemed ordinary. I was lying there, wide awake, like almost every night. My mind racing, thoughts all over the place. That mix of hope and fear, faith and doubt. And then, in the middle of that crushing silence, I felt it. I can't explain how. There was no sound, no audible voice, nothing supernatural to the human eye. But man, the presence of God filled that room in a way I still can't describe without getting chills all over. It felt like someone had wrapped their arms around me. But not a physical hug, it was like a hug for my soul, you know? A peace so overwhelming, so far beyond logic, that it made me cry. But this time, it wasn't the kind of crying that comes from pain or despair. It was different. It was the cry of someone who suddenly realizes, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that they've never been alone. That even on my worst days, even in my rebellion, even in my pride, God never left me. And that night, without a doubt in my heart, I knew He was there. With me. In the darkness. In my valley. In my chaos. And you know what hit me the hardest? I realized that God doesn't wait for you to be all fixed up, polished, spiritually perfect before He shows up. No. He shows up right in the mess, in the pain, in the confusion. Because He's God. And that night, I understood something that changed everything inside me. God never needed my eyes to reveal Himself. He had always wanted me to learn to see with my heart. And from that moment on, my friend, everything started to make sense in a way you can't even imagine. After that night, something inside me flipped a switch. And look, don't think I suddenly turned into some kind of faith superhero. Not at all. It was actually a process. Sometimes slow, sometimes painful, sometimes even confusing. The first thing I had to understand and accept was that from that moment on, I wouldn't be walking by sight anymore. I'd have to learn to walk by faith. And let me tell you, for someone who was used to being in control of everything, that was terrifying. It's like walking in the dark while holding on to nothing but an invisible rope, trusting it's leading you to the right place. That's when Victoria stepped in again, once more as an instrument of God in my life. She introduced me to Pastor William Carter, a man with unbelievable patience, who began to mentor me. And through him, I came across a Bible verse that became almost like a motto for my life. For we walk by faith, not by sight. 2 Corinthians 5 verse 7. That verse hit me so deeply, it felt like God had written it just for me. That's when I realized, even without my physical eyes, I could still see, as long as I learned to trust. And honestly, the beginning wasn't easy. There were days I wanted to quit. Days I thought I wasn't strong enough. Days when doubt tried to take over. But with every devotional, every Bible reading, every conversation about God, it felt like an invisible blindfold was slowly being removed from my soul. And little by little, I started to understand. The Christian life isn't about seeing. It's about trusting. Trusting even when you don't understand. Even when you don't see. Even when everything around you says it's not going to work out. And it was in the middle of that process that something even more powerful began to happen. For a long time, I prayed, or better said, begged God to give me my sight back. I thought the only way He could heal me was by helping me see again. But you know what? God is a master at surprising us. That's when I realized not all healing is physical. In fact, some of the greatest healings we can receive are invisible, because God started restoring something inside me that was far more sick than my eyes. My soul, my heart, my mind, my identity. And honestly, that was the healing I needed the most, even though I didn't know it. It was freeing to understand that I was no longer a prisoner of what I had lost. Up until that point, I saw myself as broken, disabled, useless. But little by little, God began to show me that I was never defined by my condition. Not by what I could see. Not by what I could do. He showed me that in His eyes, I had always been His child. And when that truth finally hit me, man, it felt like 1,000 pounds were lifted off my shoulders. It didn't suddenly make life easy. No. But for the first time, I felt whole, even if, in the world's eyes, I still looked incomplete. And you know what else? I discovered that some pains God doesn't remove, because He uses them. And that's exactly what He did with me. God didn't heal my eyes, but He healed my arrogance, my pride, my unbelief, my false sense of self-sufficiency, things that blinded me way more than any physical condition ever could. And when I realized that, I understood something powerful. My story wasn't over. Far from it. In fact, it was just beginning. Because God didn't just heal me. He gave me a brand new purpose. And that's where things start to get even more interesting. You know that emptiness that followed me for so long? That hole in my soul that money, success, and recognition could never fill. Yeah, it just disappeared. And you know why? Because I finally understood that life only makes sense when we understand our purpose. And in my case, God made it very clear to use my pain, my story, to reach other lives. And once that became clear to me, something lit up inside. It was like I had been given a new kind of vision. Not with my eyes, but with my soul. That's when I started sharing my testimony at church. And honestly, I didn't think anyone would want to hear it. I mean, who was I, right? Just another guy in the crowd. But I was completely wrong. Every time I stood up there, holding that microphone, sharing my story, I saw people getting emotional, crying, relating. People who, just like me, We're carrying invisible wounds. And that's when I realized, when we let God use our scars, they become bridges to someone else's healing. And it didn't stop there. I started visiting hospitals, institutions, support groups for the visually impaired. And it wasn't just to talk about overcoming. No, it was to talk about God, about how He transforms, restores, heals, and gives life a brand new meaning. And listen, if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: God never wastes pain. Never. Every tear has a purpose. And the more I poured myself into this mission, the more I realized that I was actually seeing so much more now than I ever did when I still had my sight. And that realization changed everything. If someone had told me a few years ago that I'd lose my eyesight and still feel more whole, more alive, and more fulfilled than ever, I would have called them crazy. But here I am, telling you exactly that. Today, I see more than I ever did when my eyes were working. I see love where I used to see obligation. I see purpose where I used to see routine. I see people as souls, not obstacles, competition, or numbers. And honestly, that kind of freedom is something I can't even fully explain. You know what's crazy? For years, I thought seeing was just a physical thing, that it depended on the eyes. But now, I know there's a kind of vision that's infinitely more powerful, the vision of faith. That kind of sight doesn't fail. It doesn't grow old. It doesn't wear out. And it's that vision that lets me wake up every morning with the deep certainty that God is with me. That even in the dark, He leads me. That even when I don't know what tomorrow holds, I can rest because I do know who holds my future. And sometimes I stop and think, if I had to choose between getting my physical sight back or keeping this vision of the soul that God gave me, you know what? I'd choose exactly what I have now. Because today, I'm a free man. Free from dependence on the material, the visible, the temporary. And the more I walk this path, the more I realize that my story, my testimony, doesn't end here. In fact, it still has so much left to impact, transform, and bring light to those who, maybe today, are still walking in the dark. If you've made it this far, listening to my story, know this: it wasn't by accident. It doesn't matter if you're going through a valley, a loss, a hidden pain, or a crisis no one else sees. God sees it. And He knows. Just like He found me in the middle of my darkness, when I had no strength left, when I thought everything was lost, He can absolutely find you right there, exactly where you are. Because, my friend, let me tell you a truth that changed my life. The darkness in your eyes will never be greater than the light of God inside you. And look, I don't know what your struggle is. I don't know if it's an illness, a heartbreak, a failure, or maybe just that silent feeling that nothing makes sense anymore. But you know what I do know? God isn't intimidated by your pain. He doesn't reject you because of your doubt. He doesn't walk away because of your weakness. On the contrary, it's exactly in that place, where you think no one can find you, that He chooses to hold you. And if you let Him, He will show you that there's still life. There's still purpose. There's still a future waiting for you. And before I finish, I want you to hold this close to your heart. If God was able to rescue me in the worst moment of my life, then He can and wants to do the same for you. And if somehow my story spoke to you, don't ignore that. Because trust me, God doesn't waste encounters. And maybe, just maybe, Right now is the moment He's calling you to start seeing life in a way you've never seen before. And now, after sharing all of this with you, I want to ask you something. Not with my eyes, but with my soul, straight to your heart. What kind of blindness has been keeping you from seeing God in your life? Maybe it's not physical, like mine, but it could be the blindness of anxiety, pride, bitterness, fear, emptiness, or unbelief. And listen, if you've made it this far, let me tell you something serious. This is not a coincidence. This is God calling you. The question is, are you going to keep ignoring His voice? Or are you going to let Him help you see life in a way you never imagined possible? Because listen, if He was able to find me at rock bottom in the darkest valley of my life, then, without a doubt, He can and wants to find you too, right where you are. All you need to do is take the first step. And maybe that first step is simply admitting that you need Him. And before I go, let me challenge you. What are you going to do with everything you heard here today? Will you let these words go in one ear and out the other? Or will you let them reach your heart and bring real transformation?